Hello, Rick here again with another of these Starship name legacies, and this time we're on the namesakes and origin of the Bellerophon, which has several canon depictions, historical vessels and Star Trek extra-canonical mentions, so let's take a look. The name originates from the Greek tales of the hero Bellerophontes. He was gifted a Pegasus to ride and killed the mythical Chimera. Some tales have his origin as a demigod similar to Hercules. However, Bellerophon grew arrogant and tried to climb Mount Olympus on his steed when Zeus humiliated him by throwing him from his horse. The disgruntled hero spent the rest of his life as a hermit in shame. A bit of a 50-50 origin there. Back in 1786, during the Napoleonic Wars, there was an HMS Bellerophon, probably the most famous real vessel of the name. It was nicknamed the BELLEROPHon, which I kinda like. It was on board this vessel that Napoleon surrendered. She had a long history of combat and was involved in numerous skirmishes and operations lasting through the turn of the century, when in 1815 she was converted into a prison ship and renamed the Captivity in 1824, so that the namesake could be passed to another ship of the line. In 1836 the Captivity was broken up. The ship then that received the title was originally the 1818 HMS Waterloo. She was used as part of an experimental fleet and trained with new tactics and the like until being sold in 1892. Two very long-serving vessels, it seems. In 1865, the HMS Bellerophon name found its way to the Central Battery Ironclad, complete with ram. She served in the Channel Fleet until 1871, when she was reassigned to the Mediterranean Fleet for a year. She even served as the flagship of the North America Station, and was accidentally rammed by a merchant vessel. Being, ironclad, the Bellerophon was fine. The merchant ship was not. The Bellerophon underwent several refits and in 1904 was designated as a training vessel and renamed. 3 years later, 1907 sees the launch of the Bellerophon-class dreadnought, the initial vessel being, yes, the HMS Bellerophon. This vessel served in the First World War, and in a strange coincidence, which I hope isn't a tradition, it collided with a merchant vessel. Being, a dreadnought, the Bellerophon was fine. The merchant ship was not. This vessel too served as a flagship for several admirals and was finally broken up in 1922. In 1942 and 1945 there were two Minotaur-class cruisers that were planned to be named Bellerophon, but they never were, possibly as there was a USS Bellerophon ARL-31 in 1944. This was an Eclois-class landing craft, and she served for 2 years as a repair vessel before being decommissioned. The first canon starship to bear the name USS Bellerophon was the NCC 62048, a Nebula-class starship. The first mentions we have of it actually include the year 2359, when Ensign Natasha Yar was assigned as a junior security officer fresh out of the academy. As a Nebula-class starship, it had the typical mission pod that could be switched out, and in its only canon appearance, supported the tactical variant. However, its early missions from 2362 to 2365 saw it performing mapping missions. That sounds like dull work, but it is probably what the vast majority of Starfleet was engaged in. Survey missions are vastly important in creating those star charts that the Federation is so reliant on. But that changed in 2367, when Starfleet amassed a fleet to intercept the Borg cube at Wolf 359. The infamous battle saw an underprepared Starfleet lose 39 ships, including the USS Bellerophon. It seems that this is the first ship of its name to be sunk, as it were. You don't sink in space. You know what I meant. 2 years later, the Intrepid line of starships was being completed, and one of its number was the USS Bellerophon NCC 74705. It was not one of the original 4 models of Intrepid class, but launched under the command of Captain Adams. Unusually for an Intrepid vessel, which were usually reserved for scientific deep space missions, the Bellerophon was engaged in numerous war games and actual battles for most of its service. Perhaps this was Starfleet testing out the capabilities of the Intrepid class as a combat vessel, but whatever the case, it must have served well, as it became the flagship of Admiral William Ross and was often used to ferry the Dominion war hero around the theatres of war, likely for the Intrepid's high speed and manoeuvrability. In Star Trek Online there are actually two USS Bellerophon ships. The first is a cruiser that has a randomised appearance, but then later that year we have an Intrepid-inspired variant class named after this vessel. The first of its line being the NX 62048, later recommissioned as the NCC 62048-A. In a similar way to the Discovery class of 2409, this USS Bellerophon was an attempt to recreate the unexpected success of the Intrepid based on the legendary journey of the USS Voyager. This vessel has no launch date, but is likely to have replaced the previous cruiser that was presumably lost earlier that year. The Bellerophon name carries a long history of battles and a surprising amount of survivability, with many ships of the name serving long and distinguished careers. The name's origin as a mythical hero and monster slayer makes sense for battleships, and we see a recurring theme in both history and Star Trek that they end up being the chosen vessels for admirals in times of war. In fact, I'd say the real-world histories of the namesake are more storied and impressive than the Starfleet interpretations. Let's just hope Admiral Ross never collided with a Ferengi merchant's shuttlecraft at some point. So, there we have it, a brief and storied history of ships of the name Bellerophon. Honestly, there were a lot more here than I expected, so thank you for putting me onto the trail of that one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time for another science fiction video, probably Trek, but maybe not. Thanks again, and goodbye.